What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. In this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about how to survive nuclear war, and this is part 8 in my How to Survive Nuclear War series. If you haven't seen the other parts, I recommend you go and watch those parts before you watch this part, so this way you have a better understanding of what I'm talking about, because in this video, I'm just going to build upon what I already taught in parts 1 through 7. So if you haven't seen parts 1 through 7, I recommend you go back and watch those parts before you watch this part, so you're not confused about what I'm talking about. And in this part, I'm going to talk to you guys about how to improvise a fallout shelter. This is not about making a permanent fallout shelter or a bunker. This is about how to improvise a fallout shelter for situations where you need extra protection from radiation, or if you have no protection at all and you need to improvise a shelter to protect yourself. That's what I'm going to cover in this video. Now, it takes a lot of time and effort for me to make these videos, so if you want to support my channel, check out my merchandise in the description box below this video. There's a link to my Teespring store, and you can pick up some of my merchandise. I'm actually wearing one of my sweatshirts, and it says "Speak softly and carry a big stick," and it's got a picture of me shooting my 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. So if you want to support the channel and look cool in the process, check out my Teespring store. I would really appreciate it. So without further delay, let's talk about how to make an improvised fallout shelter. All right, guys, so before I get into the meat of the video, I just want to review something very important that I've covered in prior videos, and that's your dose limits. You need to commit these numbers to memory. So the maximum yearly dose permitted for radiation workers by the EPA is 50 millisieverts, or 0.5 rads, or 0.5 rems. A radiation worker is somebody who works at a nuclear power plant. 50 millisieverts per year, or 0.5 rad, or 0.5 rem. Okay, that's recommended by the EPA. That's for somebody who works in a radioactive environment every single day. The EPA says you should not exceed 50 millisieverts per year of accumulated dose. The cancer threshold dose is 100 millisieverts, or double the yearly maximum allowable dose for radiation workers, and that's 10 rads or 10 rems. And this is the point at which cancer risk increases or starts, and that's 100 millisieverts of total accumulated dose. The maximum allowable dose for first responders or emergency workers engaged in life-saving work in a radioactive environment is 250 millisieverts, or 25 rads, or 25 rems. So 5 times the max yearly dose permitted by the EPA. Radiation sickness begins at 400 millisieverts, or 40 rads, or 40 rems. Okay, that's when radiation sickness starts. Okay, so you'll start to have some symptoms of radiation sickness at 400 millisieverts of accumulated dose, or 40 rads, or 40 rems. That's probably the most important number that you need to memorize. Okay, you really want to stay below 500 millisieverts of accumulated dose if you're in a post-nuclear war situation. And the way that you can monitor your accumulated dose is to purchase a radiation dosimeter, and I'll discuss more about that in future parts in the series. But just remember, 400 millisieverts of accumulated dose, or 40 rads or 40 rems, is where radiation sickness begins. Okay, so you really want to stay below that. Severe radiation sickness begins at 2 sieverts, or 2,000 millisieverts or 200 rads or 200 rems. And in some cases, this is fatal. Severe radiation sickness, possible survival with immediate medical attention is 4 sieverts or 4,000 millisieverts or 400 rads or 400 rems. And a fatal radiation dose where death is certain even with treatment is 8 sieverts or 8,000 millisieverts or 800 rads or 800 rems. Now, if you don't know what any of that means, I discussed this in parts 4, 5, 6, and 7. So you may want to go back and watch the parts where I talk about radiation dose and radiation principles, the basics of understanding the different terminologies and fundamentals of radiation. You need to know that in order to survive a nuclear war. So go back and watch that if you don't know what any of this means. But just remember, radiation sickness starts at 400 millisieverts. Cancer starts at 100 millisieverts. So remember those numbers, guys. And what you're looking at here is a list of the halving thicknesses of common materials. And I have these posted on my website for your reference. And you can get to my website by going to www.NYPrepper.com. And that's New York spelled out, prepper, one word, .com. And if you go to my blog, I have this posted in my blog. And I also have a handy dandy chart that shows the relative density of different materials compared to concrete. And that's a very useful thing to have, because if you have to improvise a shelter, you may have to use, let's say, books or something weird that's not found on this chart. And if you need to know what the halving thickness is of that material, if it's not listed on this chart, that other chart that I have on my website, it shows the relative density of different common materials like sheetrock compared to concrete. And then you can adjust how much of that material you need based on the density of that material when compared to concrete. Okay, but here we have at the top of the list, lead is the best. And lead, you have 0.4 inches of lead will reduce radiation by 50%. That's what a halving thickness is. Again, if you don't know what any of this means, you need to go back and watch the prior videos. I'm not going to explain it in this part. Steel has a halving thickness of 1 inch. Concrete, 2.4 inches. Red bricks, 3.4 inches. Sand and packed dirt, 3.6 inches. So these are the ones that you really need to be familiar with: lead, steel, concrete, red bricks, and sand or packed dirt, especially these three here: concrete, red bricks, and sand or packed dirt, because these are what you're most likely going to use if you're improvising a shelter. You're most likely going to probably use packed dirt because that's what's most readily available pretty much everywhere. Sand is also available depending on what part of the world you live in. Red bricks are very common. Also, concrete is very common. So these three, you should commit to memory what the halving thicknesses are. Concrete, 2.4 inches. Red bricks, 3.4 inches. Packed dirt or sand, 3.6. Okay. Broken anthracite coal, which is kind of a weird one because where are you going to get your hands on broken anthracite coal? But I found this, so I figured I would share it. I actually live in Pennsylvania, so there's a lot of anthracite coal. I guess I could raid a local coal mine. Pennsylvania has the most amount of anthracite coal in the world. So maybe I could find an anthracite coal mine and raid it and take some anthracite coal. But 6 inches for broken anthracite coal. That's not bitumen coal, that's anthracite coal. So bitumen coal is the more common type of coal, which is softer. I don't know what the halving thickness is for that, but anthracite coal is hard coal, and that's 6 inches. Ice has a halving thickness of 6.8 inches. Water, 7.2. Books or magazines, 8 inches, and that obviously depends on the book or magazine. It's different variety of papers and things like that, but generally speaking, 8 inches of books or magazines will reduce radiation by 50%. So that's actually pretty good. So if you're in a situation where you have to improvise a fallout shelter and you're in a library, you can use the books in the library to make a fallout shelter if you stack enough of them, around you with enough halving thicknesses to get the appropriate protection factor. And I discussed protection factors in prior videos. Wood has a halving thickness of 11 inches and snow has a halving thickness of 20 inches, okay? So really, you really want to remember the main ones, concrete, red bricks, packed dirt, water about 7 inches, water or ice 7 inches, books, magazines, wood, snow, lead, steel, that's important to remember too, but where you're going to get your hands on, lead plates in a post-nuclear war environment. So in the previous parts, I discussed how to find a suitable fallout shelter. I covered how much protection different common structures provide, so I won't be discussing that in this video. The protection that a structure provides is rated by what's known as the protection factor. During the Cold War, every basement in every house in the United States had protection factors calculated by experts, and the protection factor rating was stamped on architectural plans and also stamped in different parts of the basement of a home, so the homeowner could know which parts of the house or which parts of the basement were the best to shelter in. If you would like to learn more about what types of structures you can use as a fallout shelter, go back and watch part 7. And if you would like to learn more about radiation and protection factors, check parts 4 through 7. So in this video, I will not be discussing how to build a permanent fallout shelter because most people can't build a permanent fallout shelter for various reasons. However, if you own a home with a basement that is mostly underground, you should consider building a permanent fallout shelter. You can also use it as a safe room against marauders if you reinforce it and add an escape tunnel through the foundation to the outside. It can easily be concealed with sheetrock to make it look like any other normal room in your basement. If you are interested in building a permanent shelter in your basement or in your home, there are many plans available on the internet. The best location for a permanent shelter is in the corner of your basement, near the part of the basement that is surrounded by the most earth. If you are interested in building this type of shelter, a simple permanent fallout shelter can be made from 4x8 by 16-inch solid concrete blocks stacked the wide way in one layer, and that'll give you 3 halving thicknesses for a protection factor of 8, which is going to reduce the radiation by 88% from what's in your basement. And a normal full basement of a single or 2-floor wood frame house will give you a protection factor of 10 to 15, and I discussed that in part 7. So if you have a protection factor of 10 in your basement without a shelter, if you add that permanent shelter made of 4x8 by 16-inch solid concrete blocks, once you go into that shelter, you'll have a protection factor of between 20 to 25 from what's outside, which is really, really good. And this is the type of shelter you're going to want if you live near a nuclear target. And plans for this type of shelter can be found from the old civil defense documents. And what I'll do is I'll post links to those documents on my website in the blog section, and I'll try to post them in the blog section so you can just download it directly through the blog section. But the old civil defense of the United States, they had plans so you could easily build one, and they had very detailed plans on how to do it. And if you want to make a combination of a fallout shelter and a safe room, I recommend you check out a book called The High Security Shelter by Joel Skousen, and he has really detailed plans on how you can make a fallout shelter / safe room. So not only are you safe from fallout, but you're also safe from marauders and other hazards. So in what cases do we need to make an improvised shelter? As discussed in part 7, the last part, you might not need to build an improvised fallout shelter if you can find a suitable fallout shelter in your environment that provides enough shielding from radiation. And these types of structures in your environment could range from the basement of your house to an underground parking garage, a metro station, a cave, an abandoned mine, etc. And in part 7, I give examples of common structures that you can use that are common pretty much everywhere around the world. Now, the density and thickness of the structure, the power of the bomb measured in megatons or kilotons, the detonation altitude, and proximity to nuclear targets will determine whether you need to add extra shielding or to make an improvised fallout shelter. Now, as discussed in part 7, generally speaking, you want a minimum protection factor of 10. That means you're reducing the radiation by 90%. If your shelter does not provide a protection factor of 10, then you have to add extra shielding to bring it up to a minimum protection factor of 10. As discussed in part 7, in some cases, even a protection factor of 10 is not enough if you're in the DFZ, which stands for dangerous fallout zone, or an area where you're getting a radiation dose of 100 millisieverts per hour or more within the first few hours, or 10 rads or 10 rems per hour within the first few hours. And if you guys remember, radiation sickness starts at 400 millisieverts. So if you're in an area where you're getting 100 millisieverts per hour the first few hours after the fallout settles, you're going to get radiation poisoning within just a couple of hours. Now, in situations like that where you're in the DFZ and you're getting radiation higher than 100 millisieverts per hour, you're going to want to have a protection factor of 20 or more to ensure that you don't get radiation sickness. Now remember that the maximum dose for first responders engaged in life-saving activity is 250 millisieverts. And like I said, radiation sickness starts at 400 millisieverts. Now in the previous videos in this series, I've discussed the 7-10 rule, which means for every factor of 7 in time, the radiation is reduced by a factor of 10. So if you do the math, after 2 days, radiation will be reduced by 100 times. So those first few hours and first few days, it will be critical to be sheltered because that's when the radiation is going to be extremely high. And I discussed this in more details in parts 4 through 7. So now let's talk about different types of improvised shelters. I'm going to show you guys how to make an improvised shelter. The one thing that can save your life are sandbags. You can buy empty sandbags for 50 cents a piece. There's no reason not to have at least 100 sandbags or more in your home because sandbags have multiple uses. You can use them as radiation shielding, and you can also use them to stop bullets. One single 18-inch wide sandbag can stop even a Magnum rifle. So sandbags are a no-brainer. And as you can see here, packed dirt has a halving thickness of 3.6 inches. So a standard sandbag is 14 inches wide. If you fill that sandbag with dirt and you pack it down, if you do the math, 14 divided by 3.6, you're going to get between 3 to 4 halving thicknesses, and you're going to get around a protection factor of 10 with one single 14-inch wide sandbag filled with packed dirt. So dirt is also readily available. You can find it anywhere on earth. All you need is a shovel and some empty sandbags, and you can pretty much improvise any kind of shelter with sandbags. So in my opinion, the golden material is sandbags. You should go online after you watch this video and buy a lot of sandbags, empty sandbags, not full sandbags, because they're going to take up a lot of space. But empty sandbags, they don't take up a lot of space. They're 50 cents a piece. It's really a no-brainer. And here I have a package of empty sandbags. These are 14-inch by 26-inch sandbags. You can buy them from Uline, 50 cents a piece. Okay, there's absolutely no reason not to have a few hundred of these. They don't take up much room. They're lightweight. And let me just show you what one of them looks like, an empty one. So this is just an empty sandbag. Okay, you just open it up and you just start shoveling your dirt inside. All right, and this will save your life in a nuclear war. Now with the sandbags, you can either stack the sandbags up and make an actual shelter, or you can put them in specific areas to add extra shielding. For example, if you have a basement in your house and you plan to use the basement as a fallout shelter, you may need to add shielding around the windows of your basement. Even if your basement is entirely underground, you're still going to have some basement windows, and you're going to have to seal those up to prevent the gamma radiation from getting through. So that's where sandbags come into play. You can take the 14-inch wide sandbags, you fill them up, and you stack them 2 or 3 rows wide up against your basement windows or any kind of doors that you have to add extra shielding. So sandbags are very versatile. You can use them in so many different ways. It's really a no-brainer to have them, and they could save your life. Now, if you're in a full basement, you may not need to make an improvised fallout shelter. For example, if you're further away from a nuclear target and you're not in the dangerous fallout zone, so your radiation levels outside the first few hours are less than 10 rads or 10 rems per hour, or less than 100 millisieverts per hour, then you're not going to need to improvise a shelter in your basement. But if you are in the DFZ, you're going to need to improvise a shelter. So I'm going to show you guys how you can make shelters in your basement, in different types of structures, and also outside. All right, guys, so the quickest and simplest improvised fallout shelter is what you're looking at right here. And this is just a regular table. And what you do is you find some kind of a table, preferably a heavy-duty wooden table. You might want to reinforce the table by putting some kind of objects in the middle of it. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to take this table, and that's going to be your shelter. What you're going to do is you're going to pile up dense material all around the table. And there's a couple of tricks with this. First of all, you got to think about ventilation, because you're in a very small space. You're in a confined space. So you're going to have to think about ventilation. You're going to have to leave one side of the table without any shielding, partially unshielded, to let some fresh air in. Okay, so you can't completely cover the table, but what you're going to do is you're going to get a heavy-duty table, a wooden table, or the type of tables that conference rooms have. A lot of those are actually made of metal or some kind of oak or something like that. And what you're going to do is you're just going to pile stuff all on top of the table, on the sides. And like I said, you may want to put something in the middle, like a 2x4 or something like that, to reinforce the table so it doesn't collapse. But I'll show you guys a trick so your table doesn't collapse. Many people don't know about this. So what we're looking at here is the long ways of the table, okay? But if you were to actually enter into your shelter, you would be facing it like this, okay? This is the narrow part of the table. What you want to do is when you're piling up your material, and here I just have sandbags as an example. These are sandbags, but your material, you're going to want to pile it up in an arch on the top. And the reason why is when you pile it up on an arch, it distributes the weight onto the sides, okay, so it doesn't collapse. So you're going to have your material on the sides of the table. Okay, this is like normally where you would sit. Right here is where you would sit. You would have, let's say, people on this side and people on this side. So I'll just give you an example. You know, here's like a chair, okay? And then you would have a little person sitting here, okay? All right, so this is where you would be sitting. You want to pile up a lot of material here. Sandbags are the best. You want to put like 2 layers of sandbags, preferably 3. But if you don't have sandbags, any other kind of dense material would work. You're going to pile it up on both sides, and then you're going to put material on the top. But when you put the material, you want to make it like in an arch, okay? And that distributes the weight onto the sides rather than putting the weight in the middle of the table where it could collapse, okay? So that's a very important thing, but you're going to want to leave one area that is not fully shielded so you get some ventilation. So one side of the shelter, you're going to have to remove a little bit of shielding just to get fresh air. You don't have to remove a lot. It might be as simple as just pulling 1 or 2 sandbags out just to get some fresh airflow in there. So this is the quickest and simplest shelter to make. If you don't have a table, anything else will work. For example, you could get doors. If you take doors off their hinges, heavy-duty oak or wood doors or metal doors, you take them off the hinges, you pop the pins out from the hinges, you can use doors, and then you could use some other kind of object as the legs, and you just lay that door flat, and then just start piling stuff up. But remember the halving thicknesses, guys. You're going to need dense materials. If all you have is like books and furniture and things like that, you're going to need a lot of books, okay? Remember, it takes 8 inches of books and magazines for 1 halving thickness. So to get a good protection factor, you're going to need like 3 or 4 feet of books, okay, if you plan to use books. But you can use anything. You can use flower pots. A lot of commercial buildings have like giant flower pots when you walk into like the lobby of a commercial building, some kind of office building or a mall or schools. You can find those big flower pots. You can use those flower pots as shielding. You can also use them to actually support the structure. But this is just a very basic example. And again, with any kind of improvised fallout shelter, a lot of creativity comes into it. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. There's certain things that you need to keep in mind. But for the most part, once you understand the basic principles, you don't have to worry about, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? The most important thing is to get creative and just build something, okay? All right, guys. So another option is if you're caught outside or you don't have any materials that you can use for shielding, you can also dig a trench. And what you're looking at here is just a basic trench, okay? And what you're going to want to do when you dig this trench is you're going to want it to be minimum 4 to 6 feet deep. and 4 to 5 feet wide. And what you're going to do is, after you dig your trench out, you're going to want to put some kind of structure materials over the top of the trench, and then you're going to put a pile of soil on top of that structural material. So for structural material, what you could use is a door. If you have like a heavy-duty wooden door or any kind of door, you take off the hinges, you lay that door across the trench, and then you pile dirt on top of the door. Another option is to cut some logs and lay the logs across the trench, okay? And you're going to need a lot of logs. You're going to need probably a chainsaw to accomplish that quickly enough before the fallout lands. But digging a trench like this could take a few hours, because you got to dig 4 to 6 feet down, and then you got to have something to put over the trench to close it over, and then you're going to have to pile the dirt back on top, okay? So this is something that takes a lot of effort, and you're definitely going to need a few people. If you're by yourself, you could still do it in a reasonable amount of time, depending on how close you are to the detonation point. You might have a couple of hours. If you're, let's say, 100 or 200 miles from the detonation point, you might have enough time to build a shelter like this. But if you're very close, if you're just 30 miles away or 50 miles away, the fallout is going to start to land within 2 to 4 hours, and building a shelter like this might be hard. Some things that will limit you from making a shelter like this is, number one, the weather. If the attack is in the winter time, the ground is going to be frozen. The top, let's say 30 inches of the ground, is going to be frozen, especially if you're in the northern U.S. So digging the first 2 to 3 feet is going to be basically impossible because it's going to be frozen, okay? So that's a negative. Obviously, when it rains, it's going to get wet in there, so you're going to want to have some kind of a bucket to bail out the water, okay? So trench is another option. All you need is a shovel, and you need something to cover the trench, either logs or lumber or a wooden door, a heavy-duty wooden door, or even a steel door. You just lay it over the top. Couple of things that you want to consider with this type of a shelter. Number one is ventilation. Number two is the way that you pile the dirt on the top of the trench is critical, so you don't collapse your timber or your door. Now, if you're going to use timber, you're going to want to lay some kind of waterproof material over the timber before you backfill the dirt on top of the timber, because otherwise, when it rains or something, the water is going to seep through this little mound you have here, and it's going to basically go down into your shelter. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your door or your timber or your lumber, and then you're going to take even just garbage bags. Contractor bags are better, but even just regular garbage bags, you can take the garbage bags and cut them in half and lay them over the timbers, and that'll act as like a waterproof barrier. A tarp is even better, okay? But you're going to lay that over the top, then you're going to backfill the dirt that you dug out of the trench. You're going to backfill it over the top, and when you backfill the dirt on top of the structural material, again, you're going to want to make it in a mound. You see how I have it in a mound shape? And you're going to want to have 2 to 3 feet in the middle over here. And you're going to want to slope it down, okay, all the way to the sides. You want that dirt to slope down onto the sides. You don't want it to be all over here onto the door, okay, because then all the weight is going to be on this door or timbers, whatever, and it's going to collapse. So you want that material, the dirt, you're going to want it to go all the way past the sides so it's flowing on top. So the dirt is sitting on top of the sides here. And what that's going to do with this big mound in the middle, the weight is going to distribute onto the sides. And the sides are going to take the weight rather than this part here, okay? So this doesn't collapse on you. So this is absolutely essential, all right? You're going to want to make it 2 to 3 feet high, the mound in the middle, and then you're going to pile it off on the sides, okay? Another thing too is you're going to want to think about ventilation. So here we have a side view of the shelter, okay? So these are our timbers, these little round things. These are the timbers that are going over the trench. We have our dirt on the top. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to leave a small opening. This could maybe only be 1 foot. That's probably all you need, 1 or 2 feet. You're going to leave an opening here. You're not going to cover the whole thing from front to back. You're going to leave a 1 to 2 foot section empty, okay, with no shielding at all. This way you get some ventilation into the shelter. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to sit in the back of the shelter here, okay? And this will be your opening, 1 to 2 feet, so you get ventilation. And you might want to make this pretty long, like 10 feet, okay, if you have the time. If you don't have the time, you're going to have to make it shorter, not as long. If you have a group of people, you can easily knock this out quickly. If you have like a whole family, 4 people, 5 people, you can easily dig a 10-foot trench that's 4 feet to 6 feet deep and 4 to 5 feet wide very quickly. All right, but you're going to want to leave a section open, and you're not going to really need to worry too much about the radiation because you got earth all around you, and then you're going to have this 2 to 3 foot mound of dirt on top. So even though you're going to have a little opening, you're going to be sitting on the other side of that opening, so you don't need to worry about the radiation so much. But what you will want to do is you're going to want to make a simple kind of like a tarp shelter over the top of this opening. So this way, if it rains, it'll shed off that tarp and it's not going to go down into your shelter, okay? Same thing, if there's any kind of fallout that's still in the air, that could come down into your shelter. And there's something known as rain out, and I discussed rain out in the earlier parts of this series. If you don't know what that is, go back and watch that. But you can still get some rain out even a few days after the most intense fallout lands. You might still get rain out days or weeks later, and you just want to put a tarp over the top, okay? And there's multiple ways of doing that. You can use your imagination. Just think about in bushcrafting, when you make like a tarp shelter, you have your ridge line. It's basically the same concept, okay? And that's just going to shed the water away from the opening here. All right, so this is a very basic trench shelter. I definitely don't recommend this. It's much better to go inside of a structure and build an improvised shelter inside of a structure rather than doing this, because you're going to burn a lot of calories doing this. Also, you don't know when you're digging. The first 2 feet of digging might go good, but then you might hit some roots or some rocks. You definitely don't want to use this. It's not my first choice, but I wanted to just share it with you because I think it's very important to know. So once again, make sure you make the dirt over the top in a mound shape to distribute the weight so it doesn't collapse your structural material. Now, another option is if you have sandbags on hand, you can also do a modified version of the trench shelter. And what you're going to do is, rather than digging 4 feet down, you're only going to dig 2 feet down. You're still going to have it 4 to 5 feet wide. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pile up sandbags on either side of your shallow trench, which is only 2 feet wide. And you're going to pile up the sandbags another 2 to 4 feet on the sides. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put your structural material over the top, whether it's your timbers that you cut or some doors or lumber, okay? And what you're going to do when you're making the sandbags, you're going to want to have more sandbags on the bottom and kind of pyramid them up for stability purposes, for load bearing, okay? Because if you just stack them straight up, what's going to happen is it's not going to hold the weight good and it's going to collapse. So you need to kind of pyramid it up on an angle, okay? Just like I have here, I have 4 bags on the bottom, then 3, then 2, okay? You're kind of just pyramiding it up. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do your mound again over the top and the mound again. So you distribute the weight onto these sandbags. They're going to act like pillars. Okay, so you want your mound to be as high as possible in the middle, and then you're going to slope it down. This is going to be 2 to 3 feet. This is going to be 4 to 5 feet across, and you're going to slope it down so it distributes the weight onto the sides. Okay, what you can also do for extra shielding is you can also backfill soil on top of these sandbags. Okay, you can backfill soil like this, okay, on top of the sandbags, so then you have even more protection. And this is a really good option also, and it's a lot easier to make than digging all the way down 4 to 6 feet, because you don't have to dig as deep. You only have to dig 2 feet down, and when you're digging down, you can use that soil to fill the sandbags and for your mound as well. So that's another option. Same thing with this one. You're going to want to leave a small opening for ventilation, and you're also going to want to put a tarp shelter of some kind over that opening to shed water or any kind of extra fallout particles from rain out or snow out. All right, guys, so now we're going to talk about improvised fallout shelters that you can make in your home, specifically in your basement. If you have a full basement, these are the types of improvised shelters you're going to want to use if you need to add extra shielding. And again, you might not need to add extra shielding if you live pretty far away from a nuclear target. You might not have to worry about it. It's always a good thing to have extra shielding. But if you live far away from a nuclear target and you're not in the DFZ or dangerous fallout zone, which is again 100 millisieverts per hour or more, then you don't need to worry about this. But it's always good to do this anyway, just to be on the safe side. You want to add an extra shelter in your basement to add extra levels of protection. So this is a good semi-permanent solution. This is for someone who doesn't want to commit to building a permanent shelter, but you want something ready to go that you can easily throw up with a minimal effort during a nuclear attack. And what you do here is you're going to go into the corner of your basement, and this is your foundation wall here, and this is the ground, the floor. And you're going to have to make essentially kind of like a wall. But what you're going to do is you're going to use 2x8s or 2x10s, okay? And so these are the 2x8s or 2x10s. You're going to space them out 2 feet, okay? So these will be 2 feet spaces. You're going to have a 2x8 on this side, a 2x8 on this side. And what you're going to do is you're going to cut these 2x8s here. You're going to cut them to 45 degrees on both ends. Here you're going to have anchor bolts. You're going to have anchor bolts on the wall, the foundation wall, and then you're going to have anchor bolts on the ground. And what's going to happen is after a nuclear attack, you're going to have this whole thing pre-assembled. And what you're going to do is you're just going to lean this against the wall 45 degrees, just like so. And you're going to line up the anchor bolts with pre-drilled holes in your 2x10 on the edge here, and you're just going to bolt both sides down so it holds it, okay? And putting these anchor bolts in is not an easy thing to do, but you can do it. If you don't know what you're doing, then have a professional do it for you. But you're going to want to put anchor bolts on the walls and on the floor. And this doesn't have to be very tall. This could just be 4 to 6 feet, okay? Doesn't have to be very tall, all right? Just enough room to get in there. So you're going to pre-cut this little wall thing, okay? And what you're going to also do is you're going to leave some open. So you're going to have your little wall from 2x8s or 2x10s. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have open sections here. You're going to have another row of 2x8s or 2x10s right on top. You're going to put, let's say, a sheet of plywood over the top over both ends. This will be your plywood here and then your plywood here, okay, screwed on top of the 2x8s or 2x10s. Then you're going to put another layer of 2x8s, and then what you're going to do on that second layer, you're going to put sandbags in between, okay? Sandbags, you could also use anything, even if you just have raw dirt from your yard. You don't have to put sandbags. You can just bring wheelbarrows in and just fill in these spaces, okay, with dirt, sandbags, even concrete blocks, heavy-duty concrete blocks, 4x8 by 16-inch concrete blocks, solid, not hollow, okay? And that's after you put it against the wall, okay, and you bolt it down. You're going to put the weight on top, and that's going to give you like a little cave that you can go into, okay? And again, this is going to be in the corner of your basement, okay? That's where you're going to have the most protection. So this part here is going to have your sandbags, okay? This part here is going to have your sandbags or whatever you use, dirt, whatever. And then this part is going to be the structural part. This is just going to be your 2x8s or 2x10. And then you're going to have plywood here and plywood here, 45 degrees cut with a miter saw. And then you're going to have your anchor bolts here, okay? So this is a great option because you can just have this pre-assembled, ready to go. When there's a nuclear attack, all you got to do is pick this thing up, put it against the wall, put your bolts on, okay? You're going to put your bolts on, you're going to bolt it to the wall, and then you're going to fill in the top part with your sandbags, your dirt, whatever you have, blocks, okay? Now that's not enough. Once you put it down against the corner like that, you have it down, you have it bolted in, you're going to have to cover the entrance. And what I have here is just a sketch of some concrete blocks. What you can do is you can keep, let's say, a few dozen 4x8 by 16-inch concrete blocks, which are the best. Like I said, concrete is one of the best materials for shielding. One 4x8 by 16-inch solid concrete block, if you lay it down on the wide part, the 8-inch part, you're going to get about 3 halving thicknesses out of that one block, okay? So that's going to give you a good protection factor around 8, okay? So you'll reduce radiation by 88% roughly, all right, with one layer of 4x8 by 16-inch concrete blocks. Or you can put sandbags, 14-inch or 18-inch sandbags. You're going to want to put the wide part against the opening like this, and you're just going to cover the opening with your blocks, okay? And you're not going to need that many blocks because it's only going to be, let's say, 4 to 6 feet high here, and then 4 to 6 feet high here. So you're not going to need that many blocks. You know, you can buy those blocks, or those blocks are only, $1.50 each. You know, you can buy, let's say, 30 blocks. So once you get in your shelter, you bring all your supplies in, you're going to get your blocks and you're going to cover up the entrance, okay? And what you could do is periodically you could remove one of the blocks or 2 of the blocks to get airflow into the shelter, all right? You could even leave a few blocks out so it's not completely covered. You leave like one area here up top to get a little ventilation. So this is like a good semi-permanent solution, okay? Now, if you want more detailed plans, I'm going to post them to my website, okay, with very detailed plans on how to do this, all right? But you can use your imagination. You don't have to use the plans that are on my website. You can, experiment for yourself. Now's the time to do this before there's a nuclear attack, all right? And for those of you guys out there that are carpenters or handyman, you can easily do this yourself. So this is just one option for inside of your house in the basement or any basement. All right, guys, so if for whatever reason you can't do the semi-permanent shelter where you got to put the anchor bolts in the wall, maybe you're a renter and your landlord's not going to let you put anchor bolts in his walls, or whatever the situation is, here are some options for you. So here you have your traditional American wood frame house. Here is the first floor. You got your kitchen here. Here's your living room. We got Greg over here getting ready to play some Xbox. Here's his couch. And here we have the basement, okay? So what you're going to do is you want to get to the corners of your basement. You want to get to the corner of your basement, or the area of your basement that is most covered in dirt. You don't want to be in the center here, because if you're in the center, you're going to get most of the radiation, and I discussed that in prior parts. So you're going to want to go into the corners, okay? Corners are your best friend in a basement for radiation shielding. So what you're going to do, very simple, you're going to fill up sandbags, okay? And you only need one row of sandbags, and you're going to stack the sandbags up all the way to the ceiling, okay? All the way up to the ceiling, you're going to stack the sandbags, and you're going to basically make a separate room in the corner of your basement out of sandbags, okay? All the way up to the ceiling. Now, just doing this alone is going to reduce a lot of radiation, but remember, in prior parts in the series, I mentioned that a lot of radiation comes down through the house because you have wood. The floors are made of wood, usually just plywood and some tiles, and that's not going to really block radiation. And when the fallout settles on the roof of the house, the radiation is going to come down from the roof down through the house, okay? So you're going to get radiation coming in through the ceiling above you, okay? So even though you have sandbags stacked all the way up to the ceiling, you're still going to have radiation coming in on the top of you. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go above you where your shelter is, and you're going to have to stack sandbags over the top of you, okay? Now, this is a very important thing. You may have to reinforce your floor so this doesn't collapse, because if you put 20 sandbags on your floor here, your floor could possibly collapse on top of you. It shouldn't, but it could. So what you might have to do is you might have to keep some kind of a jack or a lolly column. Those of you guys who are builders, you know what a lolly column is. You can buy lolly columns that are adjustable and portable and not permanent, and you can lower them or raise them to fit a variety of different ceiling heights. And what you're going to do is you're going to make a beam essentially by screwing together 3 2x8s or even 2x6s, okay? You're going to screw them together, and that's going to be a beam, and you're going to put your beam underneath your floor joists, okay? So here you're going to have your floor joists. You're going to put your beam, all right? So this is your floor joists are going this way, okay? You're going to put an extra beam, but what you're going to do is you want the beam to be perpendicular from your floor joists, okay? So if you look up at your ceiling, if you look straight up at your ceiling, you're going to generally see your joists, which are usually spaced out 16 inches on center. These are your joists. These are usually 2x8s. What you're going to do is you're going to put your beam perpendicular to the joists, and then you're going to put your lolly column underneath this beam, okay? And you can make this beam now. You don't do it after a nuclear attack. You're not going to pull your circular saw out and start cutting beams and screwing them together. This is something you want to do now. All you need is 3 2x6s, preferably 3 2x8s or even 3 2x10s. Okay, you're going to take 3 of them. You're going to put them together. You're going to screw them together, okay? And that's going to make a nice thick beam. And then you're going to have your lolly column, okay? If you don't have a lolly column, there's other things you can use, but make sure that you try it out before a nuclear attack, because you don't want to have to start messing around with, your beam and your jack, your lolly column. your vertical support. You're not going to want to mess around with that after a nuclear attack, okay? Even something as simple as a 4x4 post, or even 2 or 3 4x4 posts, okay, will be enough. But in my opinion, a good lolly column, a adjustable lolly column, it doesn't take up much room. And you may want to keep some scrap lumber around in case you got to mess around with the spacing and stuff like that. If, let's say, your lolly column is not tall enough, or whatever the situation is, you want to have like some scrap wood that you can slide in to make sure that it's, you know, tight against your beam, okay? So you're going to want to put your lolly column underneath. Your beam is going to go across, all right? And that's going to support the floor above your head, all right? And you only need to have a beam that's long enough, as long as your shelter. And you don't need to have a huge shelter. Your shelter could be maybe 8 feet long by 4 feet wide. That's it. It doesn't have to be huge. You're only going to be in there for a few days, most likely 2 weeks, but you're going to be able to go in and out of your shelter, okay? So once you have your lolly column and your beam, you're going to stack your sandbags on top, preferably a layer of 2. You could also just do a layer of 1. That's fine. That's going to add a lot of protection. If you don't have sandbags, you're just going to have to pile dirt, okay, or bricks or whatever you have. So that's an option, okay? Now, you're also going to have to close the entrance, just like with the 45-degree one. So you're just going to stack blocks or sandbags to close the entrance, okay? And you're going to want to leave a small opening for ventilation, and you're going to want to leave an opening so you can get in and out. But you can use your creativity on how to do that. It's not that hard to make a little opening that you can just simply crawl out of, okay? You don't need to get too fancy with it, all right? Just make a little small opening, and just when you need to go out, just remove a few sandbags or remove a few blocks and just climb out. After 2 or 3 days, it'll be safe to go out to empty your waste. If you have human waste, fecal matter from being in the shelter, after like 2 or 3 days, you're going to want to go outside and dump that waste out. So that's why you're going to want to leave your shelter. Again, you don't want to go out of your shelter too much. You want to stay in there 90% of the time the first 2 weeks, but you're going to need to go out to empty waste, okay? So this is one of my most favorite options, because this could work for basically anybody with a basement. This, in my opinion, is the best option, okay? Just make sure you have enough shovels, enough sandbags, make sure you have a lolly column or some kind of post that you're going to use, a vertical support. Make sure you have your cross member beam, okay? This is an excellent option, and that's going to give you a lot more shielding. This is going to add another protection factor of 10. So if, let's say, in this situation, you would have a protection factor of 10 to 15 inside of the basement of a single floor or 2-floor wood frame house. Once you build this shelter with the sandbags on the top and on the sides, a standard 14-inch by 26-inch sandbag, this is going to give you another protection factor of 10 from these elements here, okay, these shielding materials. So then you're going to have a total protection factor of 20 to 25, okay, once you're in your shelter here, okay? So you'll be in a good position even if you're in a very high radiation area, all right? So now I'm going to show you another option for a typical American wood frame house with a basement. All right, guys, so the last shelter I'm going to show you is one that you can make by using the staircase in your basement. Okay, so here we have the first floor of our house. Here we have the basement here, and this is our stairway to get down into the basement. And what you can do is you can stack sandbags up along the side of the staircase, the sides, both sides, and then you can stack up sandbags on the back of the stairs, okay? So you're completely surrounding the stairs. And then what you can do is you can put sandbags on the stair treads also, and that'll give you some shielding over the top. And what you're going to do if you decide to do this is you're going to need also something to strengthen this staircase, because when you put the sandbags on the staircase, it could collapse from the weight, okay? Depending on how strong your staircase is and how it's made, all right? But you may want to cut also some 4x4 posts and put them underneath the stairs to strengthen them, okay? But that's something that you're going to have to figure out. It depends on your house, depends on the way your stairs are made. Again, disclaimer, I am not responsible if you do this and something happens to your house, you break your stairs or something collapses on you. I'm just giving you guys ideas. I'm not responsible for anything that happens to you, okay? Please use your common sense. Consult a carpenter or even an engineer to help you. But like I said, you're going to put sandbags on the sides of the stairs and on the back. And then you're going to put sandbags over the treads, okay? And this will give you pretty good protection. You don't need to do the whole stairway, because if you do the whole staircase, what's going to happen, it's going to be too much weight. So you're probably just going to want to do like half of the staircase. You know, this might only be 3 or 4 feet high, but that's all you need. You just need a small spot that you can sit down in, okay? And again, the first 48 hours is the most critical. That's when the radiation is going to be super duper high. So even if this is only 4 feet high and you're in a little tiny confined space, remember, you don't have to be there super long. You can get out after 2 days and just stretch your legs a little bit, okay? But first 2 days, you're definitely going to want to stay in there. But this is another option. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found something useful. Please go back and watch parts 1 through 7 if you haven't seen them yet. It's going to really shed some light on a lot of the concepts that I discuss in this video. If you don't know about some of the terminology and concepts in this video, parts 1 through 7, I discuss a lot of stuff. So go back and watch those parts. And one last thing I want to say about improvised fallout shelters is that just use some creativity, okay? Use your common sense, but think about it now. Think about, how am I going to improvise a fallout shelter in my basement? What are some materials that I have? How can I build one? What do I have around me? And more importantly, think about finding a suitable fallout shelter. If your house is not a suitable fallout shelter, then you should try to find one in your area that is suitable, that has better protection, okay, a higher protection factor. And I discuss finding suitable fallout shelters in part 7. I give examples of different types of structures that make for excellent fallout shelters, okay? So check part 7, because if you find a suitable fallout shelter that gives you a really high protection factor, you do not have to worry about making an improvised fallout shelter. Okay, just getting down into the basement of a reinforced concrete building is enough in most cases. You won't need to bother with this, okay? But if you're like me and you live in the sticks and there's no reinforced concrete buildings for 60 miles or 100 miles, then you're going to have to do something like this. If the fallout becomes really heavy in your area, you're going to have to improvise something to add extra shielding, okay? But that's pretty much it, guys. Check out my website, NYPrepper.com. Go to the blog section. I'm going to be posting reference materials there. I have a list of nuclear war targets for the entire country in every single state, the primary nuclear war targets in every single state. And I'm going to be posting a bunch of other references there as well. And also check out my sponsors, my merchandise. If you want to support me, I also have a PayPal link in the description below this video. But other than that, take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps: prepare, practice, and persevere.